Hi, and a warm welcome back to the live studio broadcast here at Nordic Business Forum at Cirkus in Stockholm. My name is Sabine von Gafke, and I'm here to continue the conversations with some of our speakers on stage. We just heard three of our speakers here after the coffee break. It was Isabella Löwengrip, Avinash Kaushik, and also Des Traynor. And Isabella was supposed to be here in the live interview, but had to sweep off for other obligations. But luckily, I happened to have Emma Storbacka here, who also interviewed Isabella on stage. And Emma, you're CEO of Avinash, a company that supports large enterprises in future-proofing their capabilities in marketing, sales, and services. And I know that Avinash is a believer that all companies will be driven by algorithms going forward. And you often refer to something called Algorithmic Experiences. Could you just sort of delve more into that? What is that?
Absolutely. If you think about any of the large successful companies today, they are at large able to take the data they have and turn that into, in a way, their revenue backbone. They know how to build strong and lasting customer relationships, how to orchestrate experiences, marketing, so that they reach growth and are able to capitalize on all of that data that they have. And I think this is really one of the key things for all organizations when it comes to thinking about customer experience. Are we just planning things channel by channel, or are we looking at how to take the data we have, create some value from it, intelligence, algorithms that then make experiences more relevant, more personalized, or maybe just kind of more convenient for you.
And looking out of your experience working with these large enterprises, looking at sort of the process of utilizing algorithms and big data and so forth, what do you find is the biggest challenges generically among all the companies?
I think one of the biggest challenges is definitely more the people, organization, process side of things. It's usually not a data problem. It's usually not a tech problem, even though one might think it is. Daring greatly and just kind of going for that big vision, maybe in smaller chunks, but still kind of realizing the role that data will have to have in the future if you want to survive.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most fundamental things that you need to get right, so that you can get all of your people aligned and start trying out things.
So the daring, the courage. And we also live, as we all know, in a post-GDPR era where, customers are getting more aware, they're more informed than ever. They really want to have that trust in companies that if they do give their data, that the data will be utilized in a good way. So how do we sort of find that perfect balance of trust, privacy, big data, and also maintaining the trust with the customers?
I think that's a brilliant question, and maybe kind of to start with, the most fundamental thing is that if you're capturing data, you need to do something with it. Because why are you otherwise asking me to submit data for you? And I think that's the kind of most fundamental thing when it comes to trust. So if you aren't creating value with the data, the consumer goes, well, what's happening here? Is my data being sold? Is it just being captured for future purposes? So creating value in the customer experiences, for example, through pulling out the algorithmic kind of approach. And then the other is, of course, all of the kind of legal and compliance things, being very transparent on what you're doing currently or what you're trying to do or planning to do. Trust is one of the most important, in a way, currencies today. And you can only imagine what happens if to the trust if we have one big data breach, for example. So the way that we manage data is, of course, important, but also that we are kind of managing the expectations for what the data is supposed to do.
So sort of trust, wavering responsibility from each counterpart. And also, speaking of algorithm, what makes algorithms what makes the optimal or good algorithm, let's say out of a client's perspective?
For many of our clients, I think seeing is believing. So in a way, if you're early on in your algorithmic journey, it might be a good idea just to do something very small and simple. And most companies have data, and there are the tools available for you to run machine learning or even deep learning models on that data. So depending on kind of your maturity, your optimal algorithm, if you will, could be something very simple like learning about customer preference and recommending a product, or knowing when a customer will churn, or it could be a full-blown revenue algorithmic revenue backbone where you have coupled a lot of different algorithms telling you everything from which customers to focus on, what you should do next with them for them to grow and prosper, which channels you should choose, how much you should invest in them, even going all the way into what creatives will resonate the most. So it's really a maturity question.
And what kind of planning? Because we live in a time with not only exponential technologies, but an accelerating pace of change and flexibility and adaptability. So what would you recommend companies? What kind of time frame do they need when looking at strategies for implementing algorithms and big data and personalized data and so forth?
I think the perception of the timelines is that it's very complex, very big, years of development, but that's not the case. So we typically say that time to value or time to proof should be between 30 and 90 days for an MVP. Can be a lot faster than that as well, depending on the complexity of what you're trying to do. But I think the more important thing is that you're constantly doing and working in an agile manner where you focus on business results rather than building your big capability or planning for a year before you actually get your hands dirty.
And sort of speaking, we're in the topic of future. What does a future-proofed marketing organization that you actually work with, what does it look like? What does it entail?
I think like we've heard today, it's a lot about putting the data in the center and realizing that you have to be able to drive results, be it either top line or efficiency from your data. And if you aren't with your current organization or capabilities able to do that, then you're in a way not future-proofed. So capturing data, making sure you are running the right algorithms, but also that you have the output channels available for those algorithms to kind of drive customer experiences is key.
And today is, it's about marketing, it's about innovation, but also leadership. So what would you say, what is the greatest maybe leadership challenge that marketers or the marketing sector has today?
I think it's two sides. One is talent and understanding. So to be able to have a bold vision, I think you also need to understand and or at least have a vision where you accept that you don't understand all of it, but you know the direction. And then the other is to visualize and communicate that vision with your team so that everybody is working towards the same direction.
And what do you think? I mean, if we look 3 to 5 years going on, do you see any specific trends coming up when it's correlated to data or algorithms or new technologies and how they're being utilized?
Well, I would say kind of the general use of machine learning in everything. So obsessing about what machine learning will be and is already able to do for your marketing, across the board.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing to focus on right now.
So machine learning, and in addition to that?
Well, then, of course, the data and the algorithms themselves, they won't solve whatever your kind of end customer, be it B2B or B2C, meets. So thinking about the strategy, thinking about the content, thinking about how are you converting your customers to do whatever it is you want them to do. Maybe just familiarize with your brand or then actually take a step and buy something. We can't forget about that part. And as we heard in Avinash's speech as well, if you mix up, in a way, the wrong channel and content with the wrong sort of activity that you're trying to drive, you're going to end up with nothing.
Well, hopefully we'll end up with everything. Emma Storbacka, thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And with that, I want to welcome my next guest, who you just also heard on stage, and that's Avinash Kaushik, who is digital marketing evangelist at Google and also co-founder of Market Motive Inc. He is a recognized and authoritative voice on how executive teams can leverage digital platforms and data to out-innovate their competitors and experience superior financial results.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. Great speech on stage.
Yes, same here.
And I'm going to dive right into it, even though we're going to try and get a different perspective.
Yes.
But I couldn't help resisting, like you were talking so much about, intent.
Yes.
the purpose of intent and looking at the 4 different categories of see, think, do, care, those clusters of intent. And even though you were very sort of portrayal about it on stage, could we just retract that for the viewers again and see what's the best strategy to be sort of game on in all 4 of these clusters?
Yeah, I think the core premise is that increasingly companies, platforms have an enormous amount of data around, and that enhances their ability to understand what is it that people's behavior reflects that they want. It could be a piece of content, it could be this glass bottle, it could be their love of plants, it could be anything. And it was very difficult if you think about how most companies would engage with audiences. It would either be to pimp something, say, hey, buy our stuff, which is okay. We all have to sell things. But it's very difficult to understand what is it people want. And so we would do surveys and ask 300 people, what do you think? And then we'll create a piece of content for them. Now you can listen to millions of people. So my core belief is that when we have access to the ability to understand people's intent, not through what they say, but how they behave, and that becomes a very powerful signal to use in order to create amazing products, amazing consumer journeys, and of course, do incredible marketing. And the 4 clusters of intent, as you said, go from people who are our largest addressable qualified audience, whose lives we can enhance, not just sell products, whose lives we can enhance, all the way down to our extra loyal customers. And how can we convert them into not just passive consumers of products, but proactive evangelists for our products by solving different problems for them. So when we have access to data, it helps us understand a person's intent. And if we use that intent to deliver a piece of marketing to them, it could be content or a product, it creates a win-win. The customer is delighted, the company earns admiration, and it increases revenue. So it's an amazing way to reimagine marketing and leave behind the last sort of 50 years legacy of just saying, what we care about is how old is somebody, or where they live, or how much money they make, so on and so forth.
And where is sort of that fine balance between, personalized data, algorithms, targeting, looking at see, think, do, care, and privacy versus, trust for brands to become those evangelists?
The very, very cool thing about using intent and using the data we have access to is that at the very beginning and at every step of the way, the consumer is in charge. So for example, if you visited website X in Sweden for the very first time and you've never been there before, and all you're doing is just clicking around. At the time, we actually know, you are actually from Gothenburg. Oh, okay, the last whole bunch of people who are from Gothenburg, they tended to like these kinds of things. And it's okay, let's do that content. As you become more comfortable with a business and you agree and say, oh, let me have an account with this company. Oh, or let me do business with them. As you give them more permission to look at things, the depth of relevancy increases. But it's always the consumer in charge. What I'm saying at the very core is, even if you don't know somebody and they have given you no permission, even anonymous information can allow you to deliver a smidgen of relevance.
Okay.
Doing complete non-relevance, even to customers you already know and have accounts with, that's insane. That's the definition of insanity. But at every step of the way, follow the consumer's permission. The consumer says, yes, I allow you to do this. Excellent, let's use that. Then the customer said, I allow you to do this too. Let's do that. We should always put the consumer in charge. But that's not how most of the most popular newspaper, your most frequently read newspaper, does it do anything the 50th time you visit it?
And why do you think that is?
And it's because we are used to not being able to do things that we're able to do now. It's just...
Okay, so it's more about educating yourself, shifting the mindset.
That's it.
But then again, a lot of this boils down to, when you say out of the customer's perspective, is storytelling. Because storytelling is how you emotionally connect and someone becomes an evangelist. So what in your expertise are the traits of really good storytelling in correlation to this?
I mean, it's to me, the place where storytelling I've written lots of blog posts on how do you tell better stories with data. Imagine what we can do with digital experiences,
Exactly.
mobile apps, and all these other things, right? So storytelling is absolutely key and important. The way I think about it is, it starts with your ability to understand the person at the other end. I call it intent, but it could be anything else, right? To understand, and then to be able to figure out not what the person can do for me, but what I can do for the customer, right? And then what I layer on top of that, so I understand what the customer wants, and I understand what my value proposition to them is. Now it comes to the art of being able to tell the story in a very consistent, engaging manner, right? And for me, I tend to rely on an understanding of human biases. I always say that it's very important to understand human biases. So I wrote a newsletter recently and laid out, here are the 12 most biases that I look for constantly, because I think if I understand where people are coming from, I can actually figure out how to approach them in a more relevant and cogent way. Then the second one is to understand how to use human behavior and psychology.
Yep.
So for example, a lot of people have data that should help them to make better decisions, but very few people take action on it. And I realized the way that I can solve that problem is to try and figure out how to create a sense of urgency for them. That's the problem. And so then now I would say, oh, here's what I would like to do, and then I tell them, and here's how much money you lose every single hour that you don't do this. No, that's creating.
That's a bit stressing.
There's a story right there. Now I could also say, oh, and here's how much profit you can make every hour.
Yeah,
Actually, humans don't behave that way. My understanding from my experiments is humans like negative incentives.
Focus on the problem instead of the solution.
That's
But that might be an ingrained, societal thing. I
It's
think
through experimentation and trying various storytelling techniques and
Yeah.
realize, here's a way to approach this particular problem. But there's no cut and dry answer,
No.
right? But it also means making data accessible. Like for me, we live in an incredibly complex world. I gave a keynote on machine learning and AI today.
Yeah.
Very, very complicated. One of the key parts of underlining your point on storytelling is, how do you make knowledge accessible?
Yeah.
There's an entire sort of body of practice that I put into ensuring that I don't dumb down complicated things because I don't believe in it. But how can I simplify complicated things so it becomes accessible to people? And this is one thing that I think we need to invest a lot more in as an industry and an ecosystem, because the world is complicated. Our world is very complicated. If you don't make it accessible, it's very difficult to try and drive the kind of change that most cultures deserve.
And I'm thinking, making it accessible, utilizing social media for good, and so forth. How do you see the landscape of social media changing? Or maybe you don't see it changing, but everything changes. But where are we what kind of future are we heading towards?
I think the future of social media is yet to be invented, I think.
Yeah.
I was one of those early people who got onto social media and thought this is God's gift to humanity, because I can be on Facebook, I can be on Twitter, and I can be my authentic self, humanize the brands that I'm working with, and I can engage with people not just when I have a product to sell them. I can, if I have to sell this product, this is my Pixel 3 phone from Google, instead of always having to sell this phone, I could actually engage with people who love to take great pictures with their phones, right? And so that's where I started. So I would always tell people that, when I have a blog post on this from a few years ago that said, if you want to win on social media, it's a very simple formula. What the customers want from social media is inform me, entertain me, provide utility. If you do these three things, you'll win with social. And that went along okay for a while, and then it turned out that it was a complete fucking waste of time. And it's because somewhere along the way, the social media platforms realized that they will control the way people access or consume your content. So suddenly, instead of me posting on Facebook and everybody seeing it, now Facebook will only show what I write as a brand to less than 1% of the people. 0.7% is the current number, actually, the real number. So which means that the entire channel where everybody could come and listen to me, and now Twitter's gone down that path, and Instagram is going down that path. So I've come to realize that there is such little value in organic engagement on social media that for brands and businesses, I advocate active use of social media primarily as a paid marketing channel. It is the only way to show ROI, because organically, your audience reach has shrunk so deeply, it's almost impossible to find a business impact.
But when you want to be that engaged in paid social media, how do you actually maintain what you spoke about earlier, the authenticity, which seems to be a growing trend now, not least on social media?
That's what I was referring to, that we're going to have to come up with a different thing, because the original promise of social media, the ability to allow us to do exactly what you said, is dead.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. But it might, platforms come and go. Maybe there is going to be another platform that will allow brands to have the platform and the opportunity to own that kind of relationship. But in the current social platforms, I think the only place I find it with the brands I work with that it exists to any degree is LinkedIn, ironically. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the reach is so small that it is almost impossible to have any impact using organic social. So the only thing you can do is use them as an advertising platform, exactly as you might use any other display platform or a newspaper, TV, or magazine. There's still value in it. But the big hope that people like me had, that here's this new coming of Jesus, marketing.
And is there?
That thing is dead.
Do you have any crystal ball that you can share for us and sort of say, like, at least of human behavior in social media? Authenticity is one route that I find, impact.
It is. So it depends. I think that for me, so I have roughly 1 million social media followers spread across the 3 big platforms.
That's good.
And it's okay. And the thing that I found is that about 18 months or 2 years ago, I realized, oh my God, this social media thing is dying, because the reach is shrinking so effectively because of these platforms, that I started a newsletter. And 18 months ago,
back.
I have
engineering.
I am one of those lame people that started a newsletter 15 years after everybody else.
And it worked?
In 18 months now, the newsletter has 50,000 subscribers.
Okay.
And that 50,000 people that I've acquired over 18 months, every company on the planet is in it. Every country on the planet. On any day, I can get a bigger engagement, bigger anything that I'm shooting for, using those 50,000, then win by million.
Wow.
And so I think no old idea is ever completely dead, and no new idea lives up to the hype that it comes with. All of them, not just social. I think as marketers, what we have to do is dispassionately look at data, dispassionately. And don't get hung up on it, like I got hung up on social. Don't get hung up on it. Dispassionately look at the data, and keep your eye on the horizon for something new might be there, or like in this example I gave you, look back and say, is there some other way in which I can own the relationship rather than renting it? The problem with social media was I was renting, and my landlord controls the existence.
You see?
It turned out to be a bad idea.
And then you found another engagement with intent.
That's exactly right.
Time has run out, Avinash, but thank you so much for giving clarity in that, and thank you also for your wise knowledge.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to go on to my third guest, who yet hasn't been on stage. This is going to be extra interesting. This is Sahar Hashemi, who is entrepreneur, best-selling author, and who will be talking about the topic Entrepreneurship, be a startup in a large corporation.
Yes.
Welcome.
Exactly. Thank you.
Great to have you here with us. And you're also a former solicitor.
Yes,
who,
exactly.
Founded Coffee Republic, who became UK's first US-style coffee bar. And you built it to become one of UK's most recognized brands with a turnover of 30 million. And then you sold that, and then you founded Skinny Candy. So I thought I'd start off with that sort of entrepreneurial nerve that you have. What made you start sort of Coffee Republic, and how did that transition come about?
Well, I started Coffee Republic because quite innocently I was in New York as a tourist, and I looked for a cup of coffee, and this was back then when America was known for horrible coffee. So bad even we could make fun of American coffee in a way. You'd sort of go to a diner and get this sort of horrible brown liquid they called coffee, that sort of bottomless cup. And I just came across new style coffee bars, in a way the predecessor to Starbucks. And I had no idea that this was a business idea. I just, as a customer, I'm always on some sort of diet, so I couldn't believe I could get skinny lattes and soya lattes and everything like that. So I just fell in love with it really as a customer, and so that's the sort of genesis of my idea. As a customer, I wanted it, and then we didn't have it in England. As simple as that.
And that's such a perfect way of describing a true entrepreneur.
Well, yes,
Find a problem where you find something that's lacking.
It's like
and
they
then
call
you
it was
find
scratching your own itch.
Exactly.
I think is important.
And you advocate entrepreneurship, defining it as being the startup in a large corporation, which you'll be talking more about on the stage. But just to convey to the audience before that, what are sort of 3 traits or qualities you need for being more innovative and having sort of an entrepreneurial mindset in a corporate company?
Well, in a funny way, I don't think it's any traits or qualities, because I think anyone can do it, which is the title I wrote about my entrepreneurial journey. That you're not born like that, and I think the biggest mistake we make is we think people are born. Some people are born entrepreneurial, some people are not, and that's just the fundamental myth I think around entrepreneurship. For me, it's just behaving differently. When you're an entrepreneur, you have nothing. You just have an idea. And you're often in your kitchen table or your garage, and you've got to turn this idea into something. Otherwise, the idea is just this little speck in your head. So you end up behaving in a certain way, and that's what I learned when I wrote my first book, that actually I haven't done anything different. Every person in this journey of turning an idea into reality follows exactly the same steps, because me and every entrepreneur have done exactly the same things. But in a big company, it's very different, because it's not just you with a little idea. You've got a huge organization, you've got a business that works, you've got products, you've got money coming in, you've got a salary, you've got distribution channels. So how do you bring that passion and that drive into a company where already you're in a bit of a comfort zone? So for me, it's just behaving a bit differently. Sort of 3 key behaviors. I actually have 6 I'm going to discuss.
Tell them all 6. We want to know, or save 3 for the stage.
It's a good rehearsal, yes.
Yeah.
So the first one is, really zero distance with customers. I think as an entrepreneur, again, as I said to you, I started with the unmet need for myself as a customer. In a big company or an established company, we get further and further away from the customer. We almost forget who is receiving our goods and services, because we're so get involved in politics and internal. So it's just going back to that. It's so critical, that sort of real empathy and really feeling what the customer does and seeing where the issues are, because the customer's world has changed so much, and yet we're focused internally. So, but then to do that, you've got to get rid of bureaucracy, because big companies have a lot of bureaucracy. It's it's all about like the processes, and the processes take over in a way. They become walls, and you never even see the customer. So you've got to break that down so people are more free. I think is really important. The third one is being clueless. I was clueless when I was an entrepreneur. I had no idea what I was doing, and this idea is sort of, you've got to embrace cluelessness in a big company, because you're not clueless. You've got a lot of experience, you've got success. So you've got to consciously unlearn, I think, slightly.
Playfulness.
And sort of become really open-minded, because if not, you'll miss the change. And that's how often, sadly, some maverick entrepreneur comes from their kitchen table and grabs big business, because they're not contaminated by this is how we always do things. So I think that it's really critical to sort of almost, I sort of say, be a big kid and just ask the stupid questions and not be scared of that, I think is important. Another one is, again, not be scared, fear. Fear of asking stupid questions, fear of trying, failing, fear of someone saying no. We end up paralyzing ourselves with the fear. So we've got to get rid of that fear. And as an entrepreneur, in a way, it's like you have a license to just, I'm an entrepreneur, I don't mind if people say no. So we've got to give that to people in big companies as well. And I think the reward of all this is, if you do all this, the real payback is that you end up working in a really fun, much more human culture. And this is the culture where everyone wants to work for, because frankly, work-life balance doesn't exist anymore. So we might as well do something we absolutely love doing. And
I totally agree. And I mean, everything you mention is like, on par. I think that the complexity is actually, integrating a culture like this in large corporations. I'm sure the will is there. It's more, and the why is there. It's maybe more the how.
Yeah. Well, for me, the how is, what is culture? But culture is a sort of sum total of behaviors. So, we always underestimate how much power we have over culture. And, a small team, you can get together and change the culture, think more of the customer, think less of processes. Don't have 40 people on a conference call. You know, culture changes like that because all culture is memory, it's muscle memory.
Sure, but it's also giving mandate and giving mandate when
yes,
it's a large
yes,
company.
Absolutely.
So is it more about really giving autonomous teams, you know, mandate?
Yeah, thinking about. I mean, it's easier to give mandate when you're smaller teams, and of course, it's got to be manageable. And you know, people mistake entrepreneurial behavior with risk taking, and you know, betting that it's not that. It's not. There's no more risk than doing what you did yesterday. It's just make it small, make your experiment small. You're not going to bet the whole house. You're not going to push a new product that's untested through your normal channels. Do what entrepreneurs do, small. You know, so that the price of failure is lower as well. And I think the mandates, I mean, I speak a lot, which is why I wrote my book, Startup Forever, because big companies need that. And it comes from the top because you can't behave the way you used to before.
No.
It just doesn't work anymore. So I think this is imperative for everyone. And, you know, the company that doesn't give you the mandate, frankly, is not going to survive that long.
And speaking of sort of large corporations, what do you see in the coming future? Because we look today and there's circular economy, there's gig economy, you know, people are more giggers, maybe like nodes of networks coming together to form a project and then going in and evaporating. How do you see the structure of companies going forward? Will there be a structure or will it be more based on a sort of gig economy?
It's a very good, I mean, it's a real balance, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, you've got thousands of people and you have to have a structure. You know, it's not sort of utopia where you're 3 people like in a kitchen table, but you need the structure. But I think in a way creating more of a federal structure, so it's small teams around this bigger unit and giving autonomy to the small teams. Because it's so much easier to manage a small team, but it's also so much easier to see the end result when you're small.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, you don't sort of think of something and never see what happened to it. So, you know, from start to finish, you know, you have a team that oversees something and much more multidisciplinary. So I think that's how we might get rid of silos, because to make stuff happen, you've got to, you know, work across silos. So I think that's the key, is to have people function around projects rather than a silo just because it's marketing or just because it's sales.
And having the diversity.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the essence of it.
And how do you look at how do you look at technologies, emerging technologies and their impact on entrepreneurship or on corporates in general and sort of the workflow and so forth?
I mean, all I can say is, you know, I only look at stuff as a consumer and look how much our life's changing. I mean, I never even go shopping because of Amazon. I mean, the guy's at my door 3 times a day delivering what I need. So, I mean, you know, how has it impacted it? Tremendously. But, you know, if you're focused on the customer, you see what you need to do to get that. You know, there's always opportunity with change. But you've got to be out there in the customer's shoes, seeing what the issues are, rather than sticking to what you used to and saying, you know, why are things different, I think. And that's the power of kind of being your own customer.
Being your own customer, walking in their shoes.
Absolutely.
And taking back to you and your sort of entrepreneurial drive and having founded these 2 companies, successful companies, what are the most rewarding or insightful lessons that you've sort of learned along the way as an entrepreneur?
Gosh, I think rewarding lessons is doing something you love every day. You know, I started my life as a lawyer and I wasn't really good at it, and I think it didn't play to my strengths. Whereas, you know, when I do what I do, really since the moment I started Coffee Republic, it's been a long career of my books, and I just do something that I know plays to my strengths, and I really enjoy it. So I think hopefully it's when work doesn't really feel like work, it's been the most rewarding, and it doesn't. For me, a Monday is like what people consider the weekend. I absolutely love what I do. It's a hobby in a way.
So what does your work life look today? Today you're...
Well, my book Startup Forever came out last month, so I've been very busy promoting that, talking to big companies around this mindset of the sort of programs around that. So it's really exciting. So every day is different. Now I'm promoting a book. It's not a product. But I'm just enjoying every day is different. I'm always out of my comfort zone. It's just teaching. I'm learning every day, and I think that's where the real excitement is.
Being that playful. And now maybe to people here who are leaders or founders or entrepreneurs and also our online viewers, if there's someone here who, you know, is creating a startup or has a startup or is an entrepreneur in a corporate world, what are the best insights you can give to them in that starting phase?
I think when you start as your own customer, you really have passion for the business. And I know entrepreneurs get very tired. People have businesses that have grown, they're probably here. You get a bit fatigued, you're a bit tired. And I think it's realizing actually what you've got is real magic, because you genuinely know the DNA of the business. You've got that umbilical cord with the business. So stick with that, because you know that business inside out. And delegate to others things you don't want to do, but just keep the passion is really important. Love's got a lot to do with business, and I think people who've started their businesses, they love what they do, and just stick to that and follow that trail, that guiding light. Let that always be your guiding light. Don't let bureaucracy, processes, never let money be your guiding light. Just let your product and what you love doing and that creature you're following be your guiding light.
I love that, because it sort of ties the circle, because what Simon Sinek said, who I interviewed at the beginning, he said, love is so important in every aspect, and also in the work and in the corporate world and the workforce. And now you sort of tie that circle.
Absolutely. It's all about being human,
passion
at the end of the day. What I will talk about today is it comes back to full circle. It's a much more human way of behaving. Empathy with customers. It's very human. It's very heart-based, very delighting customers. Going out there, trying things, curiosity, daring to not know, not being scared of failure in a way, that sort of courage, that sort of intuition stuff. It's much more human, and I think it's a much better way of working for everyone.
And I used to say that technology is reflecting human flaws and making us more humanized. Absolutely. So in that sense, we start to hook in more into the soft skills like empathy, compassion, because that's what we're talking much more about now, when we're so connected but disconnected. And
that's right. We need that sort of stuff more. Yeah.
Sahar, thank you so much for your insights and your time, and best of luck on stage and with the book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's a flow of speakers. It's now time for my last speaker of the day, my last studio speaker, Des Traynor, co-founder.
Hi,
and Chief Strategy Officer of Intercom.
That's right.
And we heard you on stage now just recently. And I'm sure that everybody knows, but I would like to reinforce it again, that you co-founded Intercom.
That's right.
A unicorn valued at $1 billion. So I thought, tell us about that journey, because it is quite a unique journey in a storytelling fashion of, building a company, and 7 years later, you've transitioned into unicorn.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I guess so we're all from Dublin, Ireland, and to go to Silicon Valley itself was kind of quite a transition. But the Intercom story actually starts inside our previous product, where we were all based in Dublin. We had loads of users of this product. We had never met a single user. We didn't know what they looked like. We didn't know who they were. So, in fact, there was a street in Silicon Valley where we had more users of our product than we did in all of Ireland. That's the magnitude of the difference, or how much we were divorced from our actual customers. So we started building this little chat thing that let us talk to our customers when they're inside our product. And the number one piece of feedback we consistently got, we would ask questions like, hey, we're working on some new stuff. What features would you like to see? And the answer was always, I don't really care too much about this product. What I'm really excited by is this chat thing. How did you do this? And we're like, wow, that's interesting. That people care more about this little the ability we've built ourselves to connect with our customers. They cared more about that than they did about the product we were using it. So we thought maybe there was an idea there. So if over the following year, we sold off the actual product. We took out this piece and we sort of said, let's try and make this a thing. Let's try and sell a way that lets internet businesses connect with their customers. So we went to San Francisco. We raised $1 million, and we kind of took things from there. Over the 6-7 years that have passed since then, we've raised, I think, $245 million. We've gone from being 4 people in Dublin to being 600 people in 5 offices. And I think I've personally held maybe 6 or 7 different roles within the company as I've kind of moved around to set up marketing, to set up recruiting, people operations, customer support, product. I've kind of worked across all of these things. It's been quite a journey so far, but lots still to go.
And I'm thinking, because a lot of times when you talk with people who have achieved success, you become a unicorn, everything sounds so simple, and then we took 1 million, and then, so what have been the challenges along the way? I mean,
oh gosh,
what is sort of that first hurdle to come over, and then scalability?
Yeah. So I think from the start, the piece we were always confident in was that we had a good idea for a product. I would say everything else has been a challenge. So it was easy to get like 4 or maybe 10 people together to build a product, but scaling that and making 100 people work on the same thing is a huge challenge. Learning how we do customer support is a huge challenge. We building out marketing when we didn't know what the hell marketing was a huge challenge. Finding people, hiring the right people, the wrong people, learning how to ask people to leave the company, sales, like every single discipline outside of our actual expertise has been like a challenge. And by a challenge, I basically mean we got it wrong, we got it less wrong, and today I think we're doing a good job. But like I think there's been no shortage of challenges, and even today, like we're trying to do things at a new scale than ever before. So, if we want to launch a product today, it has to affect. Like we launched a new product 2 weeks ago, and rolling a product out to 30,000 people, 30,000 customers, is different than rolling it out to like 4 people, which is what we had to do back then.
Yeah.
So like everything kind of changes as you just keep turning this dial up. Like your job goes from being, at the very early days, it was like work on the product. Then it was like work on the team that works in a product. Then it was like work on the strategy that creates the team. Now it's just like work on designing a company that can have a strategy, that can build teams, that can be well financed, and that can basically make the product happen. But like your control lever just gets further away from the actual software and much more into the sort of core of the business.
And it's also interesting because what you're actually conveying is it's learning by doing and learning by failing, which a lot of the times, you can hear people say, learn by failing, but it's not always the consensus that exists in a company.
For sure, and like failing isn't what you want to do, but it's what you have. Like
it's where you grow.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is a lot of people are like they have too much ego to admit the things that they really made a mistake with. So instead, it becomes a taboo inside the company that no one's allowed to talk about the fact that like X is a bit crap or whatever. Whereas I think you need to be open about sort of saying, it's a balanced message, because you need to simultaneously tell like 600 people who are spending their best years of their careers with you that you're the right person or you're the right people to actually lead this company, but also be honest enough to say we're going to make mistakes here, and some of these mistakes will be pretty impactful, and and we're gonna. Don't worry, you have to trust that we will get these mistakes whether we like it or not. We're gonna be honest when we screw up, and we're gonna go back and fix it. And you need to trust us that we'll do that. And I think that's been the recurring idea for me, is like I think a company where it's not safe to fail, it doesn't mean like yes, there's obvious negative connotations. People get risk conservative. They only try things that are guaranteed to work, but also. It turns into a company that just lies to itself. It just tells itself things are working when they're not, and I think that's the bigger risk. I think of it not being safe to say this strategy is broken. It was my idea. It didn't work. Let's go again.
So communication is also important.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking for people, companies, individuals who might be hoping to build their own unicorn or at least a successful company, one of the complicated things and one of the things that is after in demand is, building that culture, having purpose. And culture isn't just building the culture, but it's also maintaining it while you scale. So what was the strategy that Intercom had for that?
I think like there's a common phrase you'll hear is like, how do we preserve our culture as we scale, or how do we keep our culture as we scale? And I think that notion is something I've often pushed back on, because your culture is not like a relic that you should put in a glass box in a museum. It's something that has to actually grow and evolve. So when you go from being just a product team to being product plus marketing, sales, and support, your culture has to change. So when people would say, "Hey, how do we make sure we don't change our culture?" You need to kind of counter that and say our culture needs to be free to evolve, to be the best culture it can for the circumstances that surround it. We can't pretend we're 2011 when it's 2019. And I think that's something that you just need to be really open about, sort of saying we're making deliberate changes here, and we realize that this will change some aspects of the business, and we're going to talk more about the core of our business. We're going to talk more about our metrics and less about like design or whatever. And that has to be a safe thing to do. I think the most dangerous notion with culture is the idea that like you lock it up and it becomes a horrible company to join, where if you're like the person number 100 to join, you like to think that you have something to add to the culture, and you almost certainly do. But if it's kind of like if it's locked away somewhere and static, and deliberately static by principles and policies, then like it becomes really hard to feel like you're doing anything useful in that company. You're just a cog in a wheel.
So maybe if I rephrase it and say values, because at least you have a foundation of values, and then the culture can be sort of constantly evolving in a sense, but the values are sort of
the values should be like invariant. So like we have a core set of company values, as do most companies, and I think like we have probably changed them like twice in our history, I'd say. Maybe like where we've gone back and been like, you know what, this thing keeps coming up and it's so clear that we feel strongly about it, but new people joining don't understand why. We need to add it to it turns out it's not a common principle, so we need to be clear about it, and we'll sort of instantiate and say, here is a new value, or here's a tweak on the wording of an old value, because it turns out a lot of people joined and misinterpreted it or whatever. So I think it's good, like your values should be like slow moving, otherwise it just turns out you value whatever's popular any given year.
Exactly.
But I do think you need them, and they need to be a lot more invariant as you go from 4 to 400 or whatever.
And I also find it interesting, and I applaud that Intercom, the way you describe it, you really are customer centric. I mean, you listen to what your customer wanted, you asked them in the beginning when you were sort of putting together the hardware and software, and look where it took you. And just to correlate back to what you were talking on stage, you mentioned that 80% want a subscription model instead of ownership, which is a game changer and requires brand monogamy and so forth. And you've also said that onboarding is the new conversion.
Yes.
So tell us more about that.
So I think what we've seen is, as people have flocked towards, like, it used to be the case that if you were to buy, let's take software as a specific example, if you were to buy like Microsoft Windows or Adobe Photoshop, you'd pay one big fee up front, and they would get the money, and after that it didn't really matter what happened, because they've got their money, you've got your software, maybe you use it, maybe you don't, who cares? And I think in that world it would make sense to focus on conversion, because nothing else really matters. I think what we've seen lately, if you look at, say, Adobe is a simple example, because they recently underwent this change where you now pay $20 a month for Adobe Photoshop. And that means for them to get their $1,000, they need you around for 50 months, which is like 4 years. So that means if the user's not using that and not getting value, they're going to cancel after 1 month, and then your entire business falls apart. So the goal of onboarding is to take the original intent of the customer and effectively build a bridge and some sort of motivational guardrails to make sure that they don't get distracted, and to basically make sure that they realize the successful outcome that they wanted, and that they become a kind of happy, successful user. So you can get that like 4+ years of revenue. Otherwise, the business model doesn't work. I think what has happened is everyone has kind of gotten attracted to the recurring nature of this new revenue. Like, oh, they're all just going to subscribe and use this all the time. That's great. The danger is if you don't build this bridge between what marketing is saying, which previously is just focused on just getting the customer over the line, right? And what product is building. If there's no smooth bridge there, what you get is a load of people who sign up and then cancel. And that is a catastrophe if your whole business model assumes 4 years of active usage and people are falling into this chasm between marketing and product. The whole thing falls apart. So the message for me for marketers is that yes, conversions are important in the sense of getting the email address and having them click sign up, but it literally doesn't matter unless they get through to the other side. And that's just a fundamental change. It's like a trapdoor change that we won't go back from. So marketing needs to adapt.
And does that mean that you also have to do it, talking of entrepreneurship, that you have to do that, within the company, multidisciplinary sectors come together, because then you also
absolutely
contribute to the bridge?
Yeah, so like a very common discussion I have after I give a talk similar to that is people say, I need to build an onboarding team. Where does it sit? Inside marketing or inside product or inside sales? Where? And like the answer is kind of, rather than answer that question, it's more useful to say, well, what skills does it need? It needs to know what your marketing campaigns are and what you're saying in the world. It needs to have technology to get people over the line and into their product. If sales are involved, you need to connect with them as well. So I'd say build the team. The reporting structure is kind of independent, but it's more important, like with the skills they have and the metrics that they measure.
The skills they have and the metrics they have. Sorry, Des, we're now going to end this live streaming. Thank you so much for all of you viewers who have been watching. Thank you to the audience. And let's remember that together we can make impact, and the human component is as important as technology. Over to you on the main stage.